Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Jason Youngblood, the author of The Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer. And this is episode 9. And I've just been going point by point and line by line through the article, The Untold Story of Napoleon Hill, the greatest self-help scammer of all time. It's an article that was written in 2016 by a blogger named Matt Novak. So the whole article is just discrediting Napoleon Hill, the author of Think and Grow Rich. Why I care so much is because not only did the book Think and Grow Rich have a positive impact on my life, as far as the principles still being sound. Almost 90 years later, 89 years later, it was written in 1937. I read it in 2020. And the first thing I saw a drastic change in was my income, and my income drastically exploded from what I was making the previous years. And then also, the book is not only about how to manifest more money in your life, even though it's called Think and Grow Rich. It is a part of Napoleon Hill's philosophy of individual achievement, which is really about how to accomplish any goal. So anything that you desire, how to actually achieve that and turn that into reality. And that's what he teaches in all of his books. So he has a book called The Law of Success. He has a book called The Magic Ladder to Success, Think and Grow Rich, Think Your Way to Wealth. And all of them teach the same 17 principles. So, because I saw the positive results of those principles in my life, I did not want to endorse this book to my friends and family and to other people because I wanted to share that because that's something that I'm very passionate about, letting people know what I'm reading and the impact that it had on my life, and if the information will be able to empower their lives as well. And I had paused to do that because when I began to research Napoleon Hill, the majority of the information that I received were negative, um, was negative information about his business dealings when he was alive, about his marriages, what kind of husband he was, what kind of father he was, and that the only thing he was good at was selling books. So I wanted to know if that was true. So we've been going through the different claims that he didn't know Andrew Carnegie, who started him off on the mission of interviewing over 500 successful and wealthy men to compile these principles on how they became so accomplished and wealthy. So this article completely discredits the foundation of him even meeting Andrew Carnegie, let alone him getting this information from Andrew Carnegie, and then also discredits him knowing or meeting President Woodrow Wilson, President Franklin Roosevelt, Thomas Edison. And then it goes into some other claims as well too. One of the claims we talked about was if he was in a cult that tried to raise a baby and adopt it at 6 months old and raise it to only think positive thoughts so that it could live forever and never die. And so this is actually a cult or a movement that was in the 30s where they adopted a baby. And this article from Matt Novak claims that he was a member of this cult. So we talked about that. And we also talked about in episode 8 him violating what was called the blue sky laws. So blue sky laws were introduced in the late 19 teens. So like 1916, 1917, and there were states beginning to adopt this law to where you could not sell speculative stocks. So all that meant is that you couldn't sell stocks unless you had a license from the Secretary of State. You had to get a license to sell stocks because it was becoming increasingly popular for people to sell stocks and just saying, oh, hey, invest in this, and we'll take your money and then we'll grow it and then you'll get this return on there. And more people begin to be defrauded out of their money. And so what Napoleon Hill did is instead of being licensed, now he did sell stocks and he was unlicensed. However, the stocks he sold was before the law was enacted, is what we found out through the historical newspaper articles that we read and have access to in the Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. So the law wasn't enacted yet, so he had not broken the law, and it was state by state. It was a state law, not a federal law. So the state of Illinois, which is where he lived and sold stocks in his school, George Washington Institute, but the name of the company that he sold the stocks under was based in Delaware. and Delaware did not have that law. And so he was not under the law of not being able to sell stocks because it was only for Illinois businesses when he lived in Chicago, and his business in his school was not an Illinois business. We have the article in the Gospel of Napoleon Hill Scholar schema of him incorporating that business in the state of Delaware. It was not an Illinois business, so he did not break the law when he did that. So I'm going to just share my screen again and pull up the article, The Untold Story of Napoleon Hill, the greatest self-help scammer of all time. And we'll just take a look at the next claim here. And so after he talks about violation of the blue sky laws and accusing Hill of doing that, he says officially Napoleon Hill supporters are probably aware of two or three of his marriages. In fact, he was married at least 5 times. So just at least 5 times, he's leaving room for doubt that maybe he was married 6, maybe he was married 7. So we'll find out how many times he was married, and it wasn't 5. It wasn't more than 5 either. So this would perhaps not be worth mentioning except for the circumstances surrounding his first 2 marriages, the two that are largely missing from the original stories of Hill. Yeah, so his first 2 stories of his marriages are not largely missing from the Napoleon Hill's biography, our life story. Hill's first marriage occurred when he was just 15. So he's 15 years old during his first marriage, so claims Novak, and had gotten a girl pregnant. According to the official Hill biography, which is the only known record of this marriage, the young girl's father angrily demanded that the two be married, but not long after the wedding, Napoleon's bride confessed that he had not fathered her child. So at 15, he got a girl pregnant. The girl's father demanded they become married. And then shortly after the wedding, the wife confessed that Napoleon Hill was not the father. Pay close attention to that piece of information there. The marriage was annulled after that, though it's unclear why this young girl would claim that the 15-year-old Napoleon was the father if this wasn't the case. But it wouldn't be the last time the official record of Hill's life would erase one of his alleged children. All right. Yeah, and so that is the extent of that claim. So I wanted to talk about this claim as far as him being married at 15. So we're going to address that. We're going to address if he was married 5 times and how many times he was married. We're also going to address on whether or not this information is largely missing from the official life story of Napoleon Hill, and if he's an illegitimate father. So that's the main thing that he's trying to say here is that he was an illegitimate father. Um, he also later on accuses Napoleon Hill of abusing the child and throwing the baby on the floor. And so I'll find that and we'll go over that probably in the other one here. So actually here it is right here. So later on, he talks about that baby being born. So the baby that he supposedly impregnated his first wife when he was 15 with, on March 23rd, 1905, a baby girl was born, Edith Whitman Hill, named after her mother. By September of 1905, Napoleon, Edith, and their 6-month-old daughter moved to Marbury, Alabama, and lived there briefly until Hill sent his wife and child to live with Edith's father in Tazewell, Virginia. By June of 1907, Napoleon had moved himself to Mobile, Alabama, and was getting involved in the lumber business. The Cree Hill Lumber Company was incorporated in Alabama on June 28, 1907, but Napoleon had plenty of extracurricular activities. So let me just clarify here, because I'm mixing the facts in with the claims. And so the claim is that he married his first wife when he was 15 and impregnated this young girl as well too, I assume. And he's getting this information from the official Napoleon Hill biography called Lifetime of Riches, which was published in 1995. So this is where he's getting this claim from. And this is a separate story in the biography. So the two aren't related, even though we'll find out here in a moment that the two are related. So as a separate story, he knows his marriage from the woman he married when he was 15. And then in 1905, a baby girl is born, Edith Whitman Hill, who is the daughter of Napoleon Hill and Edith Whitman. All right. They moved to Marbury, Alabama. and we learned about the Cree Hill Lumber Company in episode 7. So he goes on to say about Napoleon Hill's marriage to Edith Whitman and Edith Whitman Hill, their daughter being born in March of 1905. It turns out that throughout his marriage to Edith, Napoleon was visiting a number of prostitutes in cities throughout the South, or as his business associates would call them, women of ill fame. As one of Napoleon's former friends would testify about a business trip in 1906, so this is Napoleon Hill's friends testifying, excuse me. Soon after we reached Bluefield, West Virginia, we went to a house of ill fame between 8 and 9 o'clock of that night, and Mr. Oliver Napoleon Hill, within a few minutes after arriving there, took one of the girls to a room in the same house and stayed with her until about 12 o'clock that night. Both of the women who stayed at this house were of easy virtue, and Mr. Hill went there for the purpose of having sexual intercourse with these women. He admitted to me that night when we were going to the hotel that he had sexual intercourse with the girl that he took to the room. Napoleon and Edith's fifth marriage was filled. Oh, sorry. Napoleon and Edith's 5-year marriage was filled with turmoil and violent outbursts. At one point, Napoleon took their young daughter without telling his wife, leaving the baby with Hill's mother in Virginia and threatening never to return her. In a letter dated January 24th, 1908, Napoleon Hill wrote to his wife saying, I am leaving the country where you'll never bother me. You can only communicate with me through my father and not unless he thinks best. By early April of 1908, just 3 months after writing to his wife, Edith had gotten her baby back and filed for divorce, claiming that Napoleon was a man of violent and ungovernable temper, and that he treated both her and their child with disrespect and cruelty. This cruelty included periods of violence when Napoleon would allegedly throw the toddler on the floor in bed and proceed to choke her. The elder Edith also alleged that she was constantly under the threat of violence and that Napoleon had at least once threatened to kill her on a street in broad daylight, claiming he would blow her brains out. The testimony given at the divorce proceedings by Napoleon's former business associates and friends also outlined many incidents of infidelity with prostitutes. All right, he goes on to say, as far as I can tell, Hill never showed up to the court to contest the divorce, but that may have been the least of his worries in 1908. And he goes into claiming that he had taken $10,000 to $20,000 worth of number on credit from various suppliers and stole that money, moved to Washington, D.C. from Mobile, Alabama, and changed his name. And we addressed that claim in episode 7. So let's stay here with this claim. So these two stories are actually related. And here in a minute, I'm going to paint the picture and connect the dots of how they're related. At 15 years old, him marrying a young girl, this is supposedly his first wife, after he got her pregnant, and the father of the young girl demanding that he marry her. And then after the marriage, claiming that the baby was not his. Pay attention to that detail. And then in March of 1905, a baby being born, Edith Whitman Hill, all right, to him, Napoleon, and Edith Hill, and moving to Marbury, Alabama, where he started working as a lumber salesperson, and then um, being accused by Edith of sleeping with prostitutes. And so this is during the divorce hearings, actually. So where his friend or his associate, if you want to call him a friend because he spoke against Hill, goes into the courtroom and testifies and says, hey, he admitted to me that he actually slept with prostitutes. So at this time, Edith Hill, who he married in 1903, was wanting to get a divorce from Hill. And at the time, because you can only get a divorce at this time, it was increasingly difficult because of politics and religion blending together, and religion being completely against divorce. And to get the marriage annulled and also to be divorced, there had to be good reason. And so Edith Hill began to discredit Hill and saying that he cheated. So there had to be a good reason of why the courts would grant this divorce, is that he cheated, and not only did he cheated with prostitutes, and not only that, he was violent against her and the baby. So she goes into more detail again as far as the violence against the baby by throwing her on the floor in the bed and proceeding to choke this toddler. All right. So it had to be no older than 3 years old because the baby was born in 1905 and this divorce is going into 1908. So it's 3 years later. So I'm assuming the baby would be 2 years old. So Napoleon Hill is being accused of throwing a 2 year old on the floor and on the bed and proceeding to choke the 2 year old. The elder Edith Hill, the mother, also alleged that she was constantly under the threat of violence. Not that there was violence against her, but she was under the threat of violence, and that Napoleon had at least once threatened to kill her on the street in broad daylight, claiming he would blow her brains out. All right. And so Napoleon's sleeping with prostitutes, he's physically abusing their child, and he threatened to kill her and blow her brains out. All right. And so, what I found out in my research about this marriage to Edith Hill and the woman who he married at 15 years old is that they are actually the same woman. So, if you will read Napoleon's works, all of his works, and not just kind of little paragraphs and snippets here and there, because one of the things that Novak says in this article is that he spent 2 years off and on studying this stuff, but he didn't quite get his story together. Because if you read it, in order to do really unbiased research, you have to read the entire book. If you're going to read Think and Grow Rich and take little snippets of um, paragraphs or sentences out of there to discredit them, then you have to read the whole book in context. You have to read all of Napoleon Hill's works to see what he actually claims. So you have to read his other books as well too. And now at the time, granted, his memoirs weren't publicly available, but his memoirs were recently released in, I believe, 2021 or 2022. So while he was still alive, he began to write two different memoirs. One was called Wheel of Fortune, and the other one was called uh, The Hand of Destiny. And so he had kind of little pockets of information in each one, but he hadn't blended them together and had an actual beginning and end. So what the Napoleon Hill Foundation did was they created the story together by taking some information of Wheel of Fortune and other information from Hand of Destiny. And in his memoirs, Hill talks about his first wife. Now, in Lifetime of Riches, the official biography of Napoleon Hill, um, and it's official because it was sanctioned by the Napoleon Hill Foundation. This is actually incorrect. And I'm not trying to discredit the authors or anything like that. They only had access to limited information at the time when they published this in 1995, is that the first marriage was when he was 15 years old, and he was forced to marry this woman when he was 15 because he had gotten another young lady pregnant, and the father demanded that they be married. And then after the marriage, she admitted to him that the child wasn't theirs. The reason why I know that this is the same person or the same young lady as Edith Whitman Hill is because in his memoirs called Mastermind, there is the collection of Hand of Destiny and Wheel of Fortune. He talks about his first marriage, and it describes Edith Whitman to the T. And so that takes the five marriages down to four because there wasn't a marriage when he's 15 and Edith Hill. The marriage that he had when he was supposedly 15 was Edith Whitman. Okay. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go over some of the details in the Gospel of Napoleon Hill that prove that to you. So first, I'm going to share with you what A Lifetime of Riches says, and then I'm going to share with you what Mastermind says, and then I'm going to share with you what the Gospel of Napoleon Hill Scholar or Scammer says. So this is what Matt Novak quotes here. So let me just find the. I just need to find the section again, so just bear with me here. Okay. Let me share my screen one more time. Try to make sure I'm on the right page. All right. So Matt Novak actually, so this is the background information of him marrying at 15 years old because he got somebody pregnant or a young girl pregnant. So Matt Novak actually quotes this in one of his other claims and strips this quote directly from this Lifetime of Riches biography. Napoleon soon became a prolific source of stories. His writing was unpolished, if not crude, but he compensated with unbounded verve and a vivid imagination. Indeed, he later recalled that when news was scarce and there weren't stories to tell, he simply made them up. So we talked about this, I believe, in episode 1, where here he is claiming that a 13-year-old writer just made up stories, and that carries on to how he just made up things as an adult as well too, drawing the connection that he made up that he met Andrew Carnegie and knew Andrew Carnegie and knew Woodrow Wilson and Roosevelt as well too, because he made up things here, admittedly, as a 13-year-old, that he has the habit of making stories up as well, and they are not true. And so friends and neighbors were willing to give the teenager plenty of latitude in his reporting. He was, after all, a reformed tough whose typewriter was far less daunting than a pistol. But there were limits to their tolerance, and characteristically, Napoleon reached those limits in relatively short order. One of his stories about a neighbor's moonshining operation was all too factual and picked up by several newspapers. It brought a squadron of revenue agents into the hills, and in their wake came the moonshining family, hills massed at the Hill family's front door in a seething fury. In the course of a tense confrontation that followed, they delivered a simple message. If Napoleon ever wrote another word about their moonshining operation, they would throw him and his typewriter into the river. So he made up a story about this family who was moonshining, and the authorities came to their door. So the family went to the Hill's house and threatened Napoleon. Although young Nap, as he was called, never again aroused the ire of the backwoods folk with his writing, his penchant for finding trouble in the mountain community had at least one more chapter to go. So his knack for trouble had one more chapter to go. Not long after the moonshining incident, a raging father came to the Hills' home claiming Napoleon had gotten his daughter pregnant. Napoleon's protestations were not nearly convincing enough to overcome the accusations of the girl or the murderous intent of her father. He wanted to kill and hurt Napoleon because he had gotten his daughter pregnant. With head-spinning suddenness, Napoleon found himself married and an expectant father at the age of 15. So this father was so angry that he wanted to hurt Napoleon, but he demanded that Napoleon marry his daughter even though he was 15. Napoleon was devastated. His schooling was over. His writing would give way to work in the fields or mines. His marriage was a sentence to a life of poverty and squalor, a crushing end to his fantasies of wealth and fame, an escape from a mountain culture in which he had never and would never fit. All right. But fate, or perhaps Jane and Martha, provided Napoleon with unexpected reprieve. Shortly after the wedding, Napoleon's bride confessed that he had not fathered her child. With his exoneration came an annulment of the marriage and a renewed opportunity to achieve all that he wanted from life. So pay attention to those details there. That soon after the wedding, the forced wedding, the bride confessed that Napoleon had not fathered the child. Now let's see what Mastermind says here. I believe this is it. So if you can see my screen. Now, Napoleon tells us that the woman he married at 15 and Edith Hill are the same person. So let me just find here. All right, so here he says, my marriage was doomed to failure, or my first marriage was doomed to failure before it began. And again, we're reading how Napoleon Hill, this is his memoirs, and he talks about the woman that he married at 15, and it sounds strikingly like Edith Whitman. All right, so the two women are the same person. And we find that out here in his memoirs. All right. Owing to many causes which should have been obvious to both the woman I married and myself in the first place, I was only 16. So 15 and 16 sound strikingly alike. So it's only 1 year after the other. So he says he's only 16, even though Lifetime of Riches says he's 15. So I doubt that he divorced and had one marriage annulled at 15 and then turned around and married somebody at 16. So he's talking about the same marriage. His story is just he's 16 and Lifetime of Riches says he's 15. I was only 16. All right. And she was 10 years my senior, meaning that she was 26. So he's 16, she's 26. We'll find out if this is true or not as well, too. All right. That alone was a handicap of almost insurmountable proportions. But there was another and still greater difficulty. The woman I married was motivated to marry me, despite the great differences in our ages, to escape unpleasant disharmonies with certain members of her own family. She was escaping. She was trying to escape, a rough background with her own family. I don't know if that means that they were abusive, verbally, physically, sexually, what have you, but she married him to get away from them. That's what he's saying. In other words, she married trouble in order to run away from trouble. A very common practice among both men and women, but one that usually leads to failure in marriage. There was still a third reason why the marriage did not succeed, and it is so important it perhaps should have headed the list of the three causes of failure. I can best describe this third cause of failure as lack of a common purpose in life between my wife and myself. So you may clearly understand just what I mean. I should perhaps inform you that from the day my stepmother dropped her artificial teeth and broke the plate, which resulted in her transforming my father from a country farmer into a successful professional man, I had become obsessed with the idea that I could equally or surpass his achievements in my own field of endeavor. And very frankly, I was out to accomplish just this. All right. So here he is. He gives you the timeline of this marriage when he was 16. Now keep in mind, he married Edith Whitman in 1903. And in 1903, he's 19 years old. All right. He's not going to turn 20 years old until October 26th of 1904. All right. Or 19, he's not going to turn 20 until October 26th of 1903. All right. So very shortly after my first marriage, in the summer of 1903, as previous related, I came to the attention of General Rufus Ayres. All right, Rufus A. Ayres. He started working for Rufus A. Ayres in 1902 and stopped working for him in 1904. So very shortly after his first marriage in 1903, he came to the attention of General Rufus A. Ayres. So it's around the same time, 1902, 1903. Then, one of Virginia's most distinguished and successful lawyers, talking about Ayres, with industrial and banking interest on the side. General Ayres appointed me as his chief secretary, and less than a year later, I had been appointed general manager of one of his coal mines. My appointment took place by reason of my willingness to do the work of the general manager, to whom I was at first an assistant. He having been General Ayres' son with more than a speaking acquaintance with John Barleycorn. Now, keep in mind, even though Napoleon Hill says he's 16 here, he says that shortly after he got married, he worked for Rufus A. Ayres, and he started working for Rufus A. Ayres in 1902 when he's 18 or 19 years old. So that means that if it's shortly after, it's not when he's 16. It's right around when he's 18 or 19. All right. And then who was he married to at 18 or 19? That's what we're about to find out. It was Edith Whitman, but we'll find out here as well. Shortly after I took over the general manager's job, my wife and I were were horseback riding in the mountains one Sunday morning. We were riding two very fine spirited horses belonging to the company. We dismounted at an old abandoned farm to give our horses a chance to rest and graze. My wife stood at the head of her mount, feeding him with a lump of sugar and stroking his neck affectionately, indicating her admiration of the horse. I watched her for a few minutes, admired her for admiring the horse. Then I asked if she would like to own the horse. I had made up my mind to buy him from the company and present him to her. Her answer not only ended our marriage, but it convinced me that not only makes a man's wife not only make or excuse me, excuse me, break him, but actually she does so more often than most men realize. With a sigh, which seemed to echo back from the surrounding mountaintops, my wife exclaimed, "Never in all my life do I expect to be able to own a horse as fine as this one." And so I don't know why Napoleon Hill's response to that comment is this, but this severed all there was to hold us together. The fact that she didn't expect to own a horse. Shortly thereafter, I had the marriage annulled. Keyword annulled. Remember that word when we were reading Novak's claim is that he had his marriage when he was 15 annulled as well too? Of course, because it's not the same as divorce. Of course, the legal records make no reference to my former wife's fatal words declining my offer of a horse she admired, but that was the real cause of the annulment. I have since observed that seldom is the real cause of the failure in marriage recorded in the divorce records. I have also observed that the majority of the people of the world who go through life as failures, the majority being actually the astounding number of 98 out of every 100 people, do so because they never discover the actual causes of their failures. All right, so let's go back to the beginning of this story. And he gives the time frame here in two different areas. So he says, very shortly after my first marriage, as previous related, I came to the attention of General Rufus A. Ayres. When did he come to the attention of General Rufus A. Ayres? In 1902. All right, he was not married yet, so he's getting his priorities mixed up or the order, the chronological order mixed up, is because he got married in 1903, but he came to the attention of Rufus Ayres in 1902, right? And then he gives another, in the next paragraph, another indication of the time frame. Shortly after I took over the general manager's job, my wife and I, so the same wife that he supposedly married when he was 16, all right, he's still married to her when he takes over general manager of one of Rufus Ayres' coal mine. When did he become the general manager of one of Rufus Ayres' coal mines? And it's in 1904. So let me show you an article. You're going to have to bear with me because I have to pull it up. I don't have it prepared, so my apologies. I'm going to show you when he became the general manager of Rufus Ayres' coal mine. So let me just get it pulled up here first, and then I'll share my screen with you. Just pulling this up so I can share my screen with you and then show you when he became the general manager of Rufus Ayres' gold mine, because that's going to tell you when he's married to his first wife and who his first wife is. Is it the woman that he married when he was 15? Is it Edith Whitman Hill? Or are they the same woman? All right, so let me share my screen with you. So you'll see here, this is dated Friday, March 25th, 1904. So in 1904, this report of Hill being promoted to the general manager of for Rufus Ayres, Mr. Owen Hill, Oliver Napoleon Hill, promoted to chief clerk. The many friends of Mr. Owen Hill, who has for a long while been General Ayres' private secretary, will be glad to learn that he has been promoted to the position of chief clerk of the Seaburg Coal Company, with headquarters at Richland, Virginia, where the plant is located. Mr. Hill is the son of J.M. Hill, or James Monroe Hill, one of Wise County's most progressive citizens. Mr. Hill graduated, or Napoleon Hill, graduated at Tazewell College in 1901, and since that time, he has made a worthy record. It will be remembered that in last June, Mr. Hill was married to Miss Edith Whitman, one of Tazewell's most accomplished young ladies, who was the daughter of Mr. W. O. Whitman. Here's the father that demanded that he marry his daughter for getting her pregnant. All right. A very progressive farmer of Tazewell, Virginia. So you'll notice here, this is March of 1904. Now, according to Napoleon Hill in Mastermind, he says it was after he was promoted as chief clerk of Seaboard Coal Company that he actually was able to exonerate his son, Rufus Ayers' son, from being imprisoned for murder. So Rufus Ayers' son accidentally kills a black bellboy while cleaning his gun. The gun goes off and accidentally kills him. This happens in September of 1904. And so in September of 1904, let me just show you that article. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and then just make sure I got that pulled up. Yeah. All right, I'm sharing my screen with you again. All right, so this is September 4th of 1904. So it was after this incident, after September 1904, that Napoleon Hill states that he was promoted to general manager of one of Rufus Ayers' coal mines because he's chief clerk of Seaboard. Then he helps exonerate Rufus Ayers' son from accidentally killing a black bellboy in September of 1904. And then in early 1905, or late 1904, in the winter or late fall of 1904, is when he becomes the general manager. So this is when he's 20 years old. He's not 15, he's not 16, he's 20. So that gives you the time frame. And it's while he's actually working for Rufus Ayers, so we know that this is the time frame that he's talking about. And at that time, he's married to Edith Whitman. He's not married to another woman. So he's talking about his first marriage at 16. Lifetime of Riches is talking about his first marriage at 15. And Napoleon Hill states this as his first marriage in his memoirs. This is my first marriage. He says at 16 and she's 26. So, if it is true, and we'll read these articles here momentarily, if it is true that he is married to Edith Whitman and the first marriage is actually Edith Whitman, she was 23 and he was 19 when they got married. He wasn't 16 and she was 26. Napoleon Hill, just writing from his memory, is not being dishonest. He just does not, he's not a Nazi for details. So, he's not saying he's 19. He's like, I know I was a teenager, but he's actually 16. And maybe he's just exaggerating the story for more flair. But at this time, Edith Whitman is 23. So they're only 4 years different apart, not 10 years different. So let's talk about the time frame. September 4th, 1904. Negro boy shot by James B. Ayers. Okay. A local paper publishes this morning an account of the accidental shooting at Richlands Wednesday night of a Negro boy by James B. Ayers, or Mr. James B. Ayers, vice president of the Interstate Finance and Trust Company. The Interstate Finance and Trust Company was a bank owned by Rufus A. Ayers, who was his boss at the time, which we just read about. All right, so the boy was employed as a Ball's Hotel as porter and was in Mr. Ayers' room making up a bed. Excuse me. Ayers was unloading his pistol, so the report goes, and it was accidentally discharged. Excuse me. The ball taking effect, excuse me, the ball of the pistol taking effect in the Negro's stomach, from which he died in 25 minutes. On the morning following, the shooting of a coroner's jury was summoned and rendered a verdict of accidental shooting. Mr. Ayers is a young man of exceedingly good character, and the affair is much regretted by Mr. Ayers and his friends. Excuse me. So this is September, and then after this is when he's promoted as general manager, and he says that in um Mastermind, not Lifetime of Riches. So I'll show you that one more time. So we'll go back to so we'll just read the story of his first job here and when he was promoted to general manager. And so we'll know that that's after he exonerates Rufus Ayers' son. So my first job was that of secretary to General Rufus A. Ayres, one of the leading lawyers and businessmen of the South who owned and operated many banks and coal mines. In less than 6 months after I went to work, I was transferred from the general's private office to the position of chief clerk of one of his coal mines in Richmond, Virginia. This is the Seaboard Coal Company, which we read about, which was in March of 1904. All right. So Seaboard was managed by his son Harry, and his other son James, who we just read about, was the chief cashier of one of the General's Bank, the Interstate and Finance Trust Company, also in Richmond, Virginia. Shortly after I went to work in my new position, a tragedy occurred which brought my first big opportunity to exercise my initiative and to lead my appointment as general manager of one of the General's coal mines, where I was in charge of 350 men. All right, so now he's talking about shortly after I went to work in my new position as chief clerk. So shortly after March of 1904, this is his position. All right, a tragedy occurred. So this is September now of 1904. So it was shortly after, it was 6 months after, which brought my first big opportunity to exercise my initiative and lead me to my appointment as general manager as one of General's coal mines. All right, and he was in charge of 350 men, being the youngest manager of a mine in the country. So he was appointed to general manager after September of 1904 when he's still married to Edith Whitman. That tells us the timeline of who he married at 15 years old. Now, just because of time, we're going to pick up in episode 10 from the articles in the Gospel of Napoleon Hill and read from there to tie that together and just to show you that the woman that he married at 15 that Matt and Novak claims this was a fifth wife or the first wife is actually Edith Whitman Hill, who was also his second wife. So they're the same woman. It's the same marriage. All right. And then on top of that, we'll talk about the accusations of sleeping with prostitutes. We'll talk about the accusations of being abusive to their daughter and actually still talk about, remember, the woman that he married when he was 15, that all happened because she was pregnant. Okay. And that the father demanded that Napoleon marry his daughter because she was pregnant. But soon after the wedding, she admitted that the baby wasn't his. The baby wasn't his. All right. So she admits that to him. So was Edith Whitman Hill, the baby that was born in 1905. Was that his daughter? Or is he an illegitimate father and never claimed her? All right. We'll find that out in episode 10. All right. Until then, guys, just remember that you can get copies of my book, audiobook, via audiobook and Audible through Audible, via ebook on Kindle. And then in print, you can get it on Amazon.com as one full book for 700 pages. That title is just The Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer, just alone, that title alone. And then you'll find smaller books with the title of Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, or Volume 4 after the title. So you can get it in 4 volumes, or you can get the abridged version, which is less than 100 pages, and just read the story. And if you'd like to have the actual newspaper articles and historical records that prove the data, if you're, interested and curious about the actual proof of all the claims that I make in the Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer, you can get the companion guide by itself, in addition to the abridged version to verify all of my claims. All right, until the next video, I appreciate you guys watching. Take care.